who are the Primarchs in Warhammer 40,000? If you've played the Warhammer 40k tabletop game, dipped into a couple of the Black Library books, or played video games like Space Marine 2, you've probably heard the term Primarch. Maybe you've even heard names like Roboute Guilliman, Angron, or Fulgrim. They're obviously important, but why exactly? Well, in this video, we're going to explain everything the Imperium allows us to know anyway. If you enjoy the video, consider subscribing here on YouTube and joining Wargamer's free Discord community, where you can debate Primarch lore with fellow nerds for 10,000 years. Who are the Primarchs? The short answer is that they are the greatest Space Marine generals the Warhammer 40,000 galaxy has ever seen. Bigger, stronger, and smarter than regular Space Marines, the Primarchs were created by the Emperor of Mankind to be the genetic templates for his legions of transhuman Space Marines, and to lead those legions to conquer the galaxy. This all happened around 11,000 years before the current Warhammer 40k timeline, in the late 30th millennium, so nearly 29,000 years in our future. The Emperor had just won total dominance over the planet Earth, which is called Terra in the 40k universe, and his next mission was to conquer the galaxy, recapturing countless human colonies and planets which had been cut off from Terra for around 5,000 years. For that, he needed the best armies humanity had ever created. He needed the Adeptus Astartes, the Space Marines. The Emperor had already tried his hand at bioengineering super soldiers. He'd used his own genes to make 10,000 warriors of the Legio Custodes, his personal guard. And to help him recapture Terra, he'd created the Thunder Warriors, a force of massive proto-Space Marines so vicious and dangerous that he had them all killed once victory was won. Neither was suitable for this new mission, his great crusade for the galaxy. He needed hundreds of thousands of warriors, with the strength and martial skill to kill and dominate, but also the discipline and intellect to rebuild and fortify the planets they conquered. Most importantly, he needed those legions to operate far and wide across space without his direct command. The Emperor needed commanders to delegate to. And how better to ensure his new generals commanded the absolute loyalty of their troops than to create legions of Space Marines who were the direct genetic children of their leader, their Primarch. So that was the Emperor's vision. With the help of humanity's best genetic scientists, and perhaps a little help from the Chaos Gods, but that's another story, the Emperor bred 21 Primarchs in his secret lab beneath the Himalayan mountains. Each contained a different strain of the Emperor's genes, gaining a portion of his extraordinary abilities and characteristics. But fate, or someone else, threw a wrench in the works. While the Primarchs were still growing in their tanks, all 21 were teleported away through the warp and scattered across the galaxy, crash landing on distant worlds. Some grew up as spoilt princes, others as prisoners and slaves. It took the Emperor almost 2 centuries to find all 21 lost Primarchs and reunite them with their armies. But finally, with a Primarch or 2 at the head of all 20 legions, the Great Crusade began in earnest. Under the Emperor's command, the Primarchs led their mighty legions to conquer thousands of worlds. The foundations of the Imperium that remains 11 millennia later was all going to plan until it wasn't. Emboldened by success, the Emperor returned to his palace on Terra to work on a secret project. And in his place, named Horus Lupercal, Primarch of the 16th Legion Lunar Wolves, War Master, in command of all the other Primarchs and legions. What came next, the apocalyptic civil war known as the Horus Heresy, was so awesome and terrible in its scale that Games Workshop has published more than 65 entire books about it. Using the 17th Legion word-bearers as their instrument, the Chaos Gods infiltrated the legions and convinced the War Master, Horus Lupercal, to declare war on the Emperor. Half the Primarchs joined Horus Rebellion, the other half stood against him. Which side each Primarch took had massive repercussions for them, their legions, and for the history of the galaxy. So it's time to meet each Primarch, learn a little bit about the path they chose, and find out where they ended up. The Lion, aka Lion L. Johnson, Primarch of the 1st Legion Dark Angels, is one of only 2 loyalist anti-Horus Primarchs we know to be alive in the current 40k setting. The Lion and his legion's culture and ways of war stem from the secretive, monster-hunting knights that Johnson grew up with on his forest homeworld of Caliban. Both he and the Dark Angels were revered for their martial skill, but also distrusted for their pride, secrets, and lies. With a little help from Chaos, those secrets also drove a wedge between the Lion and Luther, his adoptive father figure and second-in-command, which split the Legion in 2 between loyalists and traitors, staining them with a shame that still haunts them 10,000 years later. The Lion himself has mysteriously returned to Warhammer 40k though, and will fight alongside anyone to defend humanity, even the so-called fallen Dark Angels. It's almost certain this heretical behaviour will put him at odds with the Imperium very soon. Fulgrim, the preening, perfectionist Primarch of the 3rd Legion Emperor's Children, was one of the first Primarchs to join Horus's rebellion, because his obsessive quest for ultimate perfection had already led him to become corrupted by a demon of Slaanesh, the chaos god of excess, desire, and temptation. From his earliest years, rising to rule his industrial homeworld of Chemos by means of organizational genius and sheer charisma, Fulgrim stopped at nothing to make himself and his warriors the best of the best, always hungry for more glory and greatness. With Slaanesh's siren song whispering in his ear, that depthless ambition twisted Fulgrim into not only a willing traitor, but one of Horus's most vital allies, and led him, at the horrific Battle of Istvan V, to murder his beloved brother Primarch, Ferrus Manus. From that point on, Fulgrim's descent into chaos was assured, and before the Heresy War ended, he would take on his current form as an immortal demon prince of Slaanesh. Perturabo, Primarch of the 4th Legion Iron Warriors, is the most talented siege commander and perhaps the sharpest strategic mind of all the Primarchs, but he's also a bitter, twisted husk, driven mad by megalomania, envy, and spite. Marooned on a Bronze Age planet called Olympia, Perturabo was exploited by its ruler to win his wars for him. He later repaid the mistreatment by exterminating not only the tyrant, but the entire planet, and his unresolved grief, coupled with his hatred of the Emperor for denying him the glory he felt he deserved, drove him to join Horus's side in the war. As the galaxy's best siege commander, Perturabo orchestrated Horus's final assault on Terra, but as the traitor forces, maddened by chaos, began ignoring his orders, he washed his hands of it, took his legion, and left the fight. In his quest to gain the power so cruelly denied him, Perturabo later pledged himself to Chaos Undivided, taking to the warp as a demon prince, and there he remains, biding his time. Jaghatai Khan, Primarch of the 5th Legion White Scars, was one of the biggest wildcards in the Imperium's history. The great Khan modelled his Space Marine Legion after the nomadic horse-riding tribes of his home planet, Chogoris, maintaining its tribal customs and favouring lightning-fast hit-and-run tactics in war. The Khan became an outlier among the Primarchs, always placing Chogorian tradition over the Emperor's doctrines, including deploying psychic stormseers even after Psyker legionaries were banned. Jaghatai's resentment towards being on the Emperor's leash and his personal friendship with Horus Lupercal almost led him to join the traitors, but in the end, his utter hatred of chaos brought the Khan and the White Scars down on the loyalist side. Jaghatai himself was pivotal in the defense of Terra and continued fighting with his legion for 70 years afterwards. Since then, though, the Khan has been lost in the Eldar webway, chasing Drukhari pirates, though the White Scars believe he'll return when they need him most. The Wolf King Leman Russ, Primarch of the 6th Legion Space Wolves, is a complex character. On the one hand, his childhood on the icy death world Fenris made him an untamable, instinctual killer, and he and his warriors are famous for unhinged slaughter in battle. Other legions mocked them as primitive, their Primarch most of all. On the other, Russ and his Vilka Fenrika are fiercely loyal to the Emperor, despise oathbreakers above all, and proudly keep their own code of honor, unleashing their battle frenzy only when the mission demands, mostly. It made them perfect for the role of Emperor's executioners, dishing out overwhelming punishment to the Thousand Sons and World Eaters legions when they disobeyed the Emperor's orders. Critically wounded after a doomed last-ditch attempt to stop Horus's advance, Leman Russ didn't make it back in time for the Siege of Terra, and was so overcome with grief and rage afterwards that he chased the fleeing traitor fleet into the Eye of Terror, never to be seen again. The Space Wolves, though, believe he is alive and will return at the prophesied Wolf Time, the final battle for the Imperium. Rogal Dorn, stern Primarch of the 7th Legion Imperial Fists, is known as the Praetorian of Terror because he and his legion helped guard the Emperor during his secret webway project, and because when Horus turned traitor, it was Dorn who commanded the defense of the homeworld against the rebels. The Imperium's greatest defensive strategist, Rogal Dorn was famously stony-faced, as hard and cold as his Arctic home of Inuit. Other Primarchs called him joyless, but without Dorn's methodical genius for fortifications, the final siege of Terra would have been over before it began. After the Loyalists won the battle, but lost the Emperor to the Golden Throne, Dorn's crippling guilt at what he saw as his failure made him vengeful, hateful, hungry for redemption, foreshadowing of the famous Black Templars chapter that would rise from Dorn's zealous first captain, Sigismund. As far as we know, Rogal Dorn was killed in Abaddon the Despoiler's first Black Crusade, but we never saw a body, and the Imperial Fists only have his severed hand. so there's always a chance he could return. Konrad Curze, the Night Haunter, Primarch of the 8th Legion Night Lords, was one of 40k's greatest tragic villains, an evil, self-confessed monster, but not one entirely of his own making. On Curze's lightless, lawless homeworld of Nostramo, he rose to power over its corrupt gang leaders the only way he thought possible, with murder, brutality, and above all, terror. As Primarch of the Night Lords, he conquered worlds the same way, openly committing unthinkable atrocities to terrify entire populations into surrendering without the need for true warfare. Despite warnings against this brutality, Konrad never swerved from his belief that humans could only be ruled through fear. And all the while, he endured mental agony that drove him to ever greater insanity. Cursed with a fraction of the Emperor's psychic foresight, Konrad Curze only ever saw dark futures that confirmed his nihilism. Finally, he saw his own death at the hands of an Imperial assassin, and he welcomed it as proof he'd been right all along. The Angel Sanguinius, Primarch of the 9th Legion Blood Angels, was the most widely loved of all the Primarchs, save perhaps Horus Lupercal before the heresy. Born with huge white feathered wings, Sanguinius was the embodiment of the Emperor's Angels of Death, but also famed for nobility and humbleness. Sanguinius's warm, charismatic leadership helped turn the Blood Angels into both a deadly force and a centre of culture, but his heroic persona hid dark secrets and fears. Sanguinius's gene seed had a flaw that was turning his warriors into maddened cannibals, and he suffered ever-worsening psychic visions of his own death, slain by Horus Lupercal. Finally, at the climax of the Siege of Terra, Sanguinius' vision came true. He dealt a wound to the War Master that allowed the Emperor to finally end him, but Sanguinius himself died at his brother's hand. Even 10,000 years later, Blood Angels are still tortured by twin curses: the mind-altering Black Rage, the Angel's psychic death scream, and the Red Thirst, the ancient gene flaw that drags them into vampiric hunger. Ferrus Manus, the Gorgon, Primarch of the 10th Legion Iron Hands, was the first Primarch to die during the Horus Heresy War, beheaded by his once beloved brother Fulgrim while his legionaries were butchered around him. In life, Ferrus was tough, workmanlike and insular, a peerless genius at forging weapons and engineering new technology, but with little patience for human weakness, sentiment or emotion. His legion followed his example, waging war with uncompromising brute force and overwhelming firepower, rather than elegant strategies or tactical finesse. In death, he signified the awful completeness of Horus's treachery, and the Iron Hands' near-complete destruction at Isstvan V set them on a path that would teach them to be more flexible than Ferrus Manus would ever have allowed. 10 millennia later, the Iron Hands chapter still carries on that legacy. Angron, the Gladiator, the Red Angel, Primarch of the 12th Legion World Eaters, has maybe the most tragic tale of any Primarch. Enslaved, tortured, and forced to fight to entertain the tyrannical aristocrats ruling his homeworld New Syria, he launched a brave but doomed slave rebellion. On the point of dying honourably with his comrades, Angron was teleported away by the Emperor and made to watch as they were slaughtered. After that, no amount of power or glory would ever dull his hatred for the Emperor, and only killing could stem the pain of the butcher's nails, torture device his captors hammered into his brain. After implanting all his world eaters with the nails, dooming them to share his addiction to bloodshed, Angron enthusiastically joined Horus's rebellion, and with every slaughter he drifted ever closer to the grasp of Khorne, the blood god of chaos. One last, well-timed push, a ritual conducted by Lorgar of the Word Bearers, triggered his final transformation into a demon prince of Khorne. The vast, red, winged beast of war he remains 10,000 years later. Roboute Guilliman, Primarch of the 13th Legion Ultramarines, was the first Primarch to return to the current 40k timeline, miraculously revived from millennia in stasis. He's now Imperial Regent and Lord Commander, in charge of all humanity's armies. In many ways, Guilliman is the perfect Primarch for the job. Born with the Emperor's genius for logistics and planning, Roboute was raised as the prince of his own miniature empire, Ultramar. In the Great Crusade, he redeveloped every conquered world in the ordered image of his home, Macran, generating thousands of regular recruits that made the Ultramarines the biggest legion in the Horus Heresy War. Yet Horus's own careful plotting kept them isolated from the most crucial battles, especially the final siege of Terra. After the heresy, Guilliman's own edict, the Codex Astartes, split all the Space Marine legions into smaller chapters, meaning Guilliman's vast army is now scattered across the galaxy as Nova Marines, White Consuls, Fulminators, and dozens more. The Death Lord Mortarion, traitor Primarch of the 14th Legion Death Guard, never trusted the warp and joined Horus's rebellion only reluctantly. Yet in the 41st millennium, he is a towering, immortal demon prince of Nurgle, chaos god of plagues. Mortarion has fallen far. Growing up on the poison-fogged planet Barbarous, Mortarion was a charismatic revolutionary, training his comrades to endure the toxic air and all manner of punishment to achieve their goal, freedom from tyranny. As Primarch of a legion, he bred the same message into his Space Marines: dogged endurance above all things. The whims of chaos, however, would take that credo to a twisted extreme. Manipulated into an impossible choice by his first captain, Callus Typhon, now Typhus, Mortarion unwillingly pledged the Death Guard to Nurgle, saving their lives, but dooming them all to an eternity in the service of the god of decay, as vessels for his manifold diseases. Magnus the Red, copper-skinned Primarch of the 15th Legion Thousand Sons, is the most powerful psyker of all the Primarchs. Raised by the sorcerous philosophers of the planet Prospero, he learned about the warp and how to harness it long before his brothers. His intelligence and psychic gifts made him mighty, but also arrogant. Magnus's early knowledge of the Great Ocean, as the Prosperine called it, mostly steeled him against the Dark God's temptations, rather than drawing him to them. Magnus was absolutely loyal to the Emperor, but overconfident in his own power, and that combination damned him. In trying to psychically warn the Emperor of Horus's betrayal, Magnus broke the protections around the Emperor's sanctum beneath his palace, letting in the demons of chaos. The disastrous consequences, with a little help from Horus's scheming, led Leman Russ and the Space Wolves to decimate Magnus's legion and burn Prospero to the ground. From that point on, though unwillingly, Magnus was set against the Emperor and destined to become what he is today, an immortal demon prince of Tzeentch, chaos god of fate. Horus Lupercal was once Primarch of the 16th Legion Lunar Wolves, virtuous and worthy war master of the Imperium, and beloved by all. 10,000 years later, what few people in the Imperium still speak his name know him as the arch-traitor, faithless and evil, architect of the worst crime in all human history. That transformation is the heart of the war that bears Horus's name, and its consequences shaped the entire Warhammer 40k galaxy forever. The first Primarch to be rediscovered by the Emperor, Horus and his Lunar Wolves Legion were always respected and revered above others. Lupercal had the Emperor's charisma, ambition, and strategic genius, but also a unique fellow feeling with his warriors, born of his hard-bitten childhood in the underground gang wars of his homeworld, Chthoniya. When the Emperor named him War Master of all the legions, few were surprised. After that, though, everything changed. The secretive warrior lodges, carefully cultivated across the legions by the word-bearers, spread whispers of dissent against the Emperor. Increasingly dissatisfied by being left to conquer the galaxy in his father's name, Horus renamed his legion the Sons of Horus in his own honor. Finally, the culmination of Chaos's great plan. Mortally wounded, Horus saw a warped vision of the past and the future that convinced him to turn on the Emperor and set the galaxy ablaze in civil war. By the war's final stages, Horus Lupercal was a twisted, horrifically powerful creature of the war. The Emperor slew him and ended the rebellion, but at a terrible cost. His body and soul ravaged, he would remain master of mankind in name only, shackled to the Golden Throne. His dream of a united human galaxy free of chaos was dead. The future would be the hopeless, war-torn hellscape we know as the 41st millennium. That was Horus's final legacy, eternal war. Lorgar Aurelian, Primarch of the 17th Legion Wordbearers, was the first Primarch to pledge himself to the Chaos Gods, and he and his infamous first chaplain Erebus were the true architects of the Horus Heresy War. When Lorgar met the Emperor and took command of his legion, he cast aside the ancient chaos-worshipping religion of his desert homeworld, Colchis, and dedicated himself to a new deity, the God Emperor. Lorgar's conquered worlds were taught to worship the Emperor too, defying the Emperor's own command to worship no gods, least of all himself. Finally, Lorgar was forced to kneel in punishment before the Emperor, in front of his whole legion, while he watched one of his beloved, faithful cities burn. After that, guided by Erebus and his mentor Corpheron, Lorgar went in search of true gods, and found them in the warp. Lorgar, the new High Priest of Chaos, set out to infiltrate the legions, corrupt Horus, and bring the truth of the gods to all the galaxy. While he failed at the last hurdle, his plans did bring the Imperium to its knees, and Lorgar lives yet as a demon prince, awaiting his chance to finish the job. Vulkan, Primarch of the 18th Legion Salamanders, is unique among his brothers in that he literally cannot die. Like the Emperor, he is a perpetual, a rare and strange mutant whose functionally immortal body will always revive itself after death, healing any injury. His other great defining characteristic is compassion, an instinct to save lives and protect the weak that shaped his Space Marine Legion as much as it guided his childhood, the volcanic death world Nocturne. That self-sacrificing instinct to protect and serve drove Vulkan through near endless suffering. First, the near annihilation of his legion at Istvan V, then months of torture, countless deaths while imprisoned by his sadistic brother Konrad Curze, and finally years of fighting back the tide of demons trying to invade the Imperial Palace before the Siege of Terra. Vulkan left his legion after the heresy and hasn't been seen for more than 8,000 years, but his salamanders believe he will return, if only they can find and reunite all his lost relics. The Raven Lord, Corvus Corax, loyalist Primarch of the 19th Legion Raven Guard, is the unquestioned master of shadows. Of all the Emperor's genetic sons, Corax was most gifted at stealth and concealment, able to psychically warp light and shadows around himself to become invisible. Corvus Corax led his legion to war as he had led the prison break from Lycaeus, a horrific mining colony where he grew up, with fast, flexible guerrilla tactics. Attack, fall back, attack again was Corax's style, launching jump-pack shock assaults to devastate the enemy and disappearing before they could retaliate. At the killing fields of Istvan V, though, bereft of their stealth advantage and betrayed by 4 brother legions, the Raven Guard were almost obliterated. The remnants, including Corax himself, were forced to fight a shadowy running battle for the rest of the war, disrupting Horus's forces but never facing them head-on. Embittered and vengeful, Corvus Corax disappeared into the Eye of Terror after Horus's defeat to chase down the traitors, but he isn't dead. He's appeared since in a mutated, shadowy warp form, materializing from nowhere to aid Imperial forces in battle. Most mysterious of all the Primarchs are Alpharius and Omegon, twin Primarchs of the 20th, the Alpha Legion. The genetic repository for all the Emperor's guile and deviousness, the twins were known to the galaxy only as a single person, Alpharius, and that name is all most of the galaxy knew. Alpharius and the Alpha Legion operated behind a veil of secrecy and subterfuge. Their origins were unknown, and behind their every battle strategy were more plans within plans within plans. Long before the Horus Heresy was even a twinkle in Lorgar's eye, Alpharius had spies in every legion, terrorist sleeper cells on Terra itself, and 1,000 backup plans for every contingency. Though he was nominally on Horus's team, Alpharius, and sometimes Omegon, ran clandestine operations to harm both sides, for their own secret aims. Both twins are supposedly dead, but are they? With the Alpha Legion, you never know. And those are the 21 Primarchs who fought the war that shaped the Warhammer 40k universe as we know it. Some sided with Horus's rebellion, knowing it could mean their doom. Some stood by the Emperor, knowing that not all the traitor Warmaster's accusations were false. Some died, some returned. Some are lost to the dark corners of Games Workshop's grim dark galaxy, and some became fearsome creatures of the war, still cutting a bloody trail across the stars 11,000 years after their creation. They have one thing in common, though. Not one of them chose to be a genetic demigod whose decisions, one way or another, would shape the future of the galaxy. And that makes them all tragic figures, in a way. If you enjoyed this video, give us a like, a subscribe, and share with your friends. And you can learn more by reading our full-length guide to the Primarchs on wargamer.com. See you next time.